It's me again. I do have to watch where I'm going here. I'm now down by the water, and it's about a 150-foot drop off to the ocean. So this is going to be part two. Part one, I was talking about how do we know that Christianity is true, or in other words, a type of apologetics. And the point I tried to make on the last one, I mentioned there's three levels, three issues that we have to deal with. Reason, the psychological reason, and social. And last time I tried to talk about social, and the point I made was that we now live in a pluralistic society based on the internet and airplanes and all those things, that we're surrounded by people who think very differently from us, and it makes this age an age of doubt. That's one. There are two reasons that we're in an age of doubt. The other one has to do with the way we look at reason. But this one is the social, living in a polyistic society and being challenged by other points of view every day on TV, on the internet, and with people that we personally know. And the biggest challenge is some of these people who are Hindus or Muslims or atheists are really nice people. That's the biggest challenge. If they were all nasty people, then it wouldn't be a challenge. But this segment, I want to talk a little bit about the psychological part to this. And I have to go back, and I cover this in my book, Butterflies and Belfry, but not only my view, but the view of N.T. Wright and other writers. The modern Christian concept of the psych, or spiritual versus psychological, is not rooted in biblical thinking at all. It has a very profound Greek and other influences that's divided up our psyche from our spiritual. So the Greek word for soul was psyche, and it's the same word. And I think to look at it in a more healthy way, we have to combine the two. So when it comes to the issue of doubt, there's several factors that play into the psychological part of that. First of all, in the New Testament, the way the word doubt is sometimes talked about, it talks about being in two minds or two psyches. And it's where you waver back and forth between two ideas, and you can't make a confident decision on either one. So it's an issue of confidence. It's the psychological factor. But the other thing where the psychological plays in effect is because the early church followed the Greeks and separated the soul from the psyche. And the reason for that, and I get into it in a lot of detail in my book, is that Plato had a view of reality that is divided between the material, which was inferior to the well, he called it the ether, or the heavenly. And the church adopted that. And because the brain is in the material, it's inferior, or at least that's what they thought. And then they had to create a separate part of the human person, of the soul, which transcends the body. And that's where this concept of soul comes from. But I don't think it's a biblical view at all. So for that reason, a lot of people base their great confidence on what they say is the spiritual. And what they mean by that, and these are cliches I've heard many times in evangelicalism, is that God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. And they'll say, I'm 100% sure God is there. He talks to me every day. But if you take away the word spiritual and insert the word psychological, you can see how vulnerable that viewpoint is. Because what you're saying is, psychologically, I feel, not know, I feel that God is there, because psychologically, I think I hear him talking to me, and psychologically, I think I know he's there. So you can see how vulnerable that really makes this argument, because it takes it away from this mystical or transcendent idea that we're talking about spiritual, or soul, and God talking to us through some spiritual, supernatural way. Now, this is where evangelicals get really, really angry at me, because they say, I know God's there. I've talked to him this morning, and I feel it in my heart. But when you've worked with in medicine and in mental illness, as I have for a lot of my career, you see people who have all kinds of ideas that they're 100% confident about. People who think that they're a dill pickle and nothing will convince them that they're not. So our fallen psyche, again, cannot come to confidence in knowing anything. Now, we can know some things, and psychological plays a role. So this brief little segment I'm going to do, talking about the psychological, is that we cannot know God is there in a spiritual way, because the spiritual and the psychological are really the same. Now, there's aspects to the psychological that are important and play a role in all this, because again, I say it's God-given. He created us, our psyche, our humanness, but it's broken, it's fallen, and it can't reach conclusions. So the very last part of this, I mentioned earlier that there's a mass exodus going on of people out of the church. There has been for several decades. And there's different statistics. Some say as many as 85% of young people raised in church eventually leave. But then there's other statistics that say a lot of them come back. But my concern is not only those who leave, but those who stay. That a lot of them, I believe, are staying for the wrong reason. They're staying because, and this goes back to the sociological too, is that they feel peer pressure from their families, from others to be in church. We all have a basic psychological desire to have value. I think that's a fundamental part of our being. We all want to feel value, and that almost drives everything else that we do. So if you're in a group where it's highly appraised to believe in God and to believe in Christianity is true, there's a tremendous psychological pressure to do that, and that's why you say that you do and that you stay in the church. But in conclusion, I'm next talk about the role of reason in this apologetic. Some people listen at this point would think, man, you've told me all the reasons not to believe in God, not to believe in Christianity is true. But what I'm trying to do is say you got to start at a candid, honest point, or none of it makes any sense. There's plenty of propaganda out there that tries to convince you that Christianity is true. I've worked in the Muslim world, and in Islam they have the same arguments, the same propaganda that convinces people that Islam is the only way. And the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and all the other groups, Hindus not so much, but they are people who try to convince you that these different worldviews are 100% right. So I'm going to come back next time and just talk about a little bit the role that reason has played in this whole thing. Until then.